my demonstration for tonight is something that I've gotten lots of requests for in the last few months. The demonstration is how to add a recessed zipper to a bag with no side panels. So I've done a recessed zipper tutorial in the past for a bag with a side panel. So this one's a bit easier and quicker than that one because it's designed for a bag with basically just a front and a back fabric. Sometimes the bag is three-dimensional with either a bottom panel or some gussets. But I wanted to show you kind of what I mean by that recessed zipper. So this is a very old and well-loved bag, and this particular bag just has the front and the back fabrics, and then there's a bottom panel. So there's no side panel. And here's the recessed zipper. So recessed zipper just means the zipper is not on the top of the bag. It's kind of inset on the inside. So I'm going to jump over to the side camera. I've prepared some step outs and I'm going to explain how to do that. So, all right, so first off, I like to sort of format my tutorials to work with just about any type of bag so that you can adapt this to the bag pattern that you're working on. So I went ahead and pulled out my pattern piece for my lining. So this is actually the large size of the Paladin pouch. So again, you'll be working with whatever pattern that you're using. So here's my pattern piece. You'll notice it says place on the fold. So this is basically half of the lining piece. All right, so we'll need to cut this piece in half and add the seam allowance. So for this pattern piece, I measured down, and you'll do the same thing. Measure down 1 3/4 inches and then draw a line through your piece. And I highly recommend tracing it on a different piece of paper first because we'll be cutting this and adding a seam allowance. So let me leave this to the side and show you what I did with this particular piece. So I cut this piece out, and you'll need to add 1/4 inch to the lower edge. That's the seam allowance. And you'll need to also add 1/4 inch to the upper edge of this larger piece. So here's the piece that I cut in half, and let me show you what it looks like when it's finalized. Okay, so here's my two final pieces. Again, you'll need to place those on the fold. And as you can see, both of the pieces are slightly bigger. That's because I needed to add that 1/4 inch seam allowance. So you'll use these pieces to cut your lining instead. So whereas before you used just this piece for the lining, you'll cut two separate pieces. So you'll need to cut 2 of each of these pieces. 2 of piece A and 2 of piece B. And I also recommend cutting Pellon Shape Flex interfacing and attaching that to both pieces because that's what I usually use for my lining when assembling a bag. All right, so let me pull out my step outs and explain what I did. In addition to cutting your pieces a little bit differently, you'll also need to cut 2 little rectangles of fabric, and these rectangles will both be cut 3 inches by 1.5 inches, and these are for your tabs that will be attaching to your zipper. So first off, you'll need to cut your zipper 1 inch shorter than the top edge of your pattern piece. All right, so let me pull this up onto the camera. So for zippers, I usually like to trim and measure the zipper in the middle of the zipper tape. So the reason that I do that, I like to eliminate the metal zipper stop because that will break a needle. And I also like to eliminate the very beginning of the zipper where the zipper teeth end and it's just tape because that kind of just makes a gap of zipper tape. So I like to have nice continuous zipper with zipper teeth. And so I measured my piece 1 inch. Again, it's going to be 1 inch shorter than the top edge of your pattern piece. So my measurements ended up being 11 1/4. So I measured and drew a line that's 11 1/4 exactly. And I wanted to create a new zipper stop before cutting my zipper just so that I didn't accidentally unzip the zipper head off the zipper tape. So what I did was, you can probably see with my dark stitching, I stitched about 1/8 inch to the inside of the line that I drew, and I just sewed back and forth a few times. That's called bar tacking, and that just creates kind of a zipper stop with the thread. So what you'll do after you create that new zipper stop is you'll cut your zipper to size. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut on the 2 lines that I drew. And obviously make sure that that zipper head is between your markings before you bar tack and cut. Okay, so what you're going to do with your zipper tab pieces is you're going to press wrong sides together in half, open the fabric out, you'll press in toward the center crease, and you'll do the same thing on the top edge. After you do that, you'll fold the zipper tab and then press it one more time. Okay, so what you'll do on either end of the zipper, you'll slide the zipper in till it hits that center crease and then refold that. So you'll take this over to the sewing machine and sew 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric, and you'll do the same thing on the other end of the zipper. And let me show you what that'll look like once you've sewn it in place. So again, you have the fabric on either end, and then you'll just trim the fabric so that it's even with the zipper tape. Okay, so next we're going to start assembling the lining. Okay, so I've got a piece already pinned in place. Let me just show you what I did here. Okay, so here's my I'm going to call it A piece, and here's my B piece, and here's my zipper. And if you'll notice, it's obviously not as long as the top edge of the fabric, so that's exactly what we need. Okay, so I'm going to sew this in layers. So the zipper is going to be sandwiched in between. This is the bottom edge of my pattern piece down here. And I'm just going to go ahead and flip this piece so that the piece A is against the right side of the zipper and the wrong side of the zipper is against piece B. And you could certainly sew these one at a time. I'm just going to go ahead and pin this first. Again, the zipper is going to be centered. And notice the zipper, the right side of the zipper is against piece A. I'm going to go ahead and flip this. Zipper sandwiched in between. And like I said, if you'd like to sew this in a single pass, you can do that. The pinned edge will be sewn using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And then let me show you what it looks like after you sew it. Okay, so this is what it looks like after it's sewn. I went ahead and pressed the piece A away from the rest of the fabrics and the zipper, and then I top stitched it. So here's the zipper attached to one long edge, and you'll do the same thing with the opposite long edge and the 2 remaining pieces. So you should have one more piece A and one more piece B. So I've got it already sewn in place. Let me show you what it looks like. Okay, so this is what it looks like. As you can see, it's top stitched, and this will end up being the top of the bag. You'll notice that the zipper is not as long as the fabrics, and that's intentional. We want to keep that extra bulk out of the seam allowance when sewing the sides of the bag. And let me show you what it looks like from the wrong side of the fabric. So this is basically the body of the lining, or the body of either the bag or the pouch. Okay, so that forms the recessed zipper portion. You'll go ahead and, whatever pattern you're working on, you'll go ahead and sew the exterior according to the pattern instructions. And when your lining is all finished and your exterior is all finished, then it's time to sew the two together along the top edge. So let me quick show you before we get to that. You'll need to sew up the side edges of your pouch also. So I went ahead and sewed my side edges using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And then I also sewed the bottom. And this particular project has gussets. Yours might have a bottom panel instead. All right, so that finishes the lining, and then let's skip ahead to what I was talking about just a second ago. I've got my exterior on the inside of the project. So this will be a pouch, but the same will work for a bag. We need to sew them along the top edge. So I turned my exterior right side out, placed it inside my lining, which is this portion right here. And I went ahead and sewed the top edge. Make sure, obviously, you have your zipper unzipped. And then once you've done that, the blue fabric is actually my exterior fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that right side out. And as you can see, there's my zipper in the lining. I'm going to go ahead and place that lining toward the inside. You'll actually give your project a good press along the top edge. And then let me just finger press this really quick, and I can show you what it looks like on the inside. Okay, so on the inside, obviously you'll need to close the opening in your lining. And after you've given your top edge of the bag a top stitch, this is what the recessed zipper looks like. So recessed, fairly easy. It was quick to put together just because there were no side panels. And as I mentioned earlier, you can use the same method for any bag or pouch that you're working on. You'll just need to make sure that you add your seam allowance, that 1/4 inch seam allowance, to your lining pieces and cut those out separately. So I hope you enjoyed that demonstration on how to add a recessed zipper to any bag with no side panel.